Still here with you on Classic FM 97.3, and it's 8 o'clock. You know what time it is? Well, it's a new show now, and it's a spin off of Business Half Hour. It is called Follow the Money by Ugodre. Good morning, Ugo. How are you doing?
Fine, Bukola. Good morning. How was your weekend?
It wasn't bad at all. Just perusing the papers and the news coming out of the social media, and I'm like,
don't go there.
Is it happening?
Don't go there.
Are we looking?
Lagos State, what is going on? Anyway, guys, good morning, everybody. Hope you had a great weekend. This is Follow the Money. On this show, you follow me as I try to break down key economic issues and things that happen in the financial market, stock market, currency markets, bond markets. All of it, we're going to try and make sense of it every week, every Monday. So if there's anything you missed out during the week that or anything that you think you need a bit more clarity about, I'm going to try to address that today. Of course, this show is brought to you by Nairametrics. If you have any questions, anything, any issues, or any topics you want me to discuss, of course, just tweet at Nairametrics or send us a message on our Instagram handle, and it would definitely get to me. Or you can as well just, send me a message directly on Instagram at Ugodre, on Twitter as well at Ugodre. Yeah, it was a busy week last week for a lot of people. Let's start with Forex, of course. We like to start with Forex. So the exchange rate at the official market closed the week at 791.75. Started the week at 795.41 and rose to us, or fell to as high as 850.22. That was the next day on Tuesday, November 14th. So continues with the seesaw. I said it here last week that I was just not. I was just feeling how the exchange rate kind of goes up and down the official market. We don't seem to understand why that's happening. FMDQ needs to explain that. But it's still happening. 791.75 is what it closed up during the week. And guess what? Intraday high, I kind of explained that as well. That's the highest point that FX sold on Friday. Guess how much? 1,120. So it appears intraday high seems to be a par with the black market rate. So that means somebody in the official market bought at 1,120, even though it closed at 791.75. Intraday low, by the way, was 701, which also suggests somebody bought at 701 during the day. So you're seeing like three wide margins for prices in one day. 1,120, 701, 791.75. That's what it is, but that's what we have to kind of deal with until the FMDQ explains. Meanwhile, FX turnover was 157.78 on Friday, $157.78 million. FX turnover is not supply. FX turnover is just how many times the dollars sort of exchange hands during the day. So that's it for trades during the week. We did also get some news during the week. I think the trip to Saudi was promising. It's quite promising. The government believes that Saudi Arabia is going to help fund some of our FX supplies. A lot of people have been saying it's audio money, but because we haven't actually seen it yet, and the money hasn't actually come in. But important to also mention that there has been some clearing of the FX backlogs, and so that's just the first step towards ensuring that we have FX supply. So it's a bit of a good thing that that's happening already. So I don't know what this week is going to turn out, but the black market is fairly stable now. Still under 1,200, not at 1,200, but under that. If you're buying inflow, also if you're exchanging cash, is around that. Novembers are typically kind of stable when it comes to exchange rate, at least over the last 2 years since we've been tracking it at Nairametrics. You don't tend to see that much volatility in November. December can be unpredictable, as much as you would think that you would see stability or a stronger Naira because Nigerians are coming in. Maybe that might not just be the case this time around, but let us see how things unfold. And still on currencies, During the week as well, the central bank made an important announcement. They did say that the old notes would continue to exist side by side the new notes, essentially just truncating every single plans the former central bank had under Godwin Emefiele. They're basically telling us that away with the old and back to the old, basically. So old Naira notes and new Naira notes will continue to coexist. Maybe that's a bit of a good thing. A lot of people actually don't like the new Naira notes. They think it's ugly. So it's probably going to exist now with the old Naira notes. So you don't have to worry about accepting or rejecting old Naira notes. By the way, currency and circulation kind of rose as well. We did notice that. I think there was a report on Nairametrics on currency circulation being at around close to where it was before we had the currency change last year. If you all recall, one of the reasons that they gave us for the currency change was that there was just too much money in circulation, and that was also one of the reasons why we're having higher inflationary. One of the reasons why we're in a higher inflationary environment. However, now that the current administration and of course the current CBN, don't really care about that. They are saying that currency in circulation is not so much of a challenge for them at the moment, and so we're gonna have to deal with. We're gonna have to learn to live with. The current currency in circulation, which is slightly just over 3 trillion naira, almost close to pre-naira redesigned level. So sometimes you just wonder what policymakers think. Sometimes one breath you tell us that we do need, we have too much exchange rate, too much currency in circulation, and that's the driver for inflation. And then in another breath, you come and say, look, it doesn't really matter. They should, both currencies should exist. And now we're back to 3 trillion in currently currency in circulation. By the way, the central bank is also working to overturn existing court ruling regarding the old notes. That's also what we hear. And then the CBN has instructed branches nationwide to continue to accept the old Naira notes. So there you go. By the way, Nigerian Customs Service also updated its own exchange rate. So expect to pay a bit more to custom if you're planning to import things. It's gone down from 7.57 to the dollar to 7.83 to the dollar. That would likely have maybe a slight impact on inflation rate, but that's what the customs announced last week as well. Yeah, of course, like I said, if you do have a message or you have anything to say, just send us a message on any of our social media handles, and I would likely address it. If you're just tuning in, this is Follow the Money, brought to you by Nairametrics, and I am Ugodre, and I'm the host of this show. We're going to move now to something else that happened last week. In case you all didn't know, Nigeria's inflation rate rose to 27.33% in October 2003. I mean, let that just sink in. 27.33%. And the last time we were anywhere close to this was in 2005, if I do recall. So inflation rate at 27.33 in October, up from 26.72 in September. There are predictions that it might hit 30% by the end of the year, and probably that very likely, because this was October. So if we are 27.33 in October, very likely it could be higher in November, and then by December's inflation numbers, which will come out in January, we could be looking at 30% or thereabout. So currently 27.33% in October. The rate is 6% higher than it was the year before. This time last year it was 21%, and so now we're at 27.32%. A lot of people think that their personal inflations are probably higher. Mine is much higher than this, but this is how the Bureau of Statistics calculates its own inflation. It says at 27.32%. The drivers of inflation, of course, we all know is food. Food has always been a major driver of inflation, and food inflation is currently 31.5%, up from 30% a year ago. A month to go rather. Food inflation is on a tier, 31.5%, up from 30.6%. Month on month inflation, which is also a key metric that we look at, did drop slightly last month. So that was a bit of the silver lining that we had in inflation numbers. But all around, it was a very disturbing inflation number. So what does this really mean for you? I'm sure you're wondering. 27.3%. A lot of people don't realize that inflation is like evil. It's the most. That's probably the most important macroeconomic indices you should track in Nigeria, because at 27.33%, it means that borrowing cost is likely going to be higher than 27.3%. That's just what it means. So if you're going to borrow, you're likely going to be paying 30+% in interest, except maybe you have fixed interest rate, or you have some kind of deal with your bank that ensures that they do not charge you high interest rates that that are variable. So that's what that means. And of course, if you're investing in anything and you want your return on investment to beat inflation, then you're looking at beating 27.33%. I do know that some people tend to say that, look, what's the point having inflation at 27.33% when what's the point looking at annual inflation rate? That you should look at average inflation rate. And on a long-term basis, Nigeria's average inflation rate is always maybe between 12 and maybe 14% these days, because of the sort of galloping inflation that we're having now. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Kind of makes sense as well. That's what you want to project for, and maybe that's even why the FGM bonds that was sold last week, long-term bonds, people actually bought the 30-year bonds. They scrambled for it because long-term the yields were higher than our long-term inflation rate. But guys, at the end of the day, I don't know how many people invest that long term. Maybe pension funds or mutual funds probably works for them. But for regular investors like you and I, you don't want your return to be eaten by inflation. So if inflation rate is 27.33%, you're going to be going for returns that are higher than 27.33%. How many investments can give you that? Like, how many things can you invest in that will give you over 30% return annually? Very difficult to find. And so inflation is such a bad thing. Inflation is also why, people basically shortchange you. Inflation is also why you have a business and, maybe your employees are gaming you, trying to steal from you. Inflation is what's driving corruption. Inflation is probably why you have a lot of substandard goods as well, flowing into the market. Fake products. These are all, symptoms of high inflationary environment. And so it's a very disturbing number, and people in higher places like in government should be held accountable to this. They should tell us how are they going to drop inflation numbers. That should be the number one metric. 27.33%. I do know that at some point it was over 40% in Ghana. But we're not Ghana. 27.3% is pretty high for inflation, and it does connote a whole lot of trouble down the line for those who will not be checking. By the way, if you go on metrics.com, you would see as well states with the highest inflation rate, which perhaps means these are states that are the most expensive to live in if you use inflation as your metric. So I'm just going to run down the top 10 states that have the highest inflation rate. Nigeria. Let's see if your state of origin is there. So drum roll. Kwara State number 10 has inflation rate of about 28 percent. Bayelsa State is next with about 29%. Ebonyi State as well follows through, 29.3%. So Ebonyi State is pretty much expensive. Abia State is 29.3%. Ondo State is 29.4%. Akwa Ibom State is 30.7%, so higher than the national average. So it's pretty much expensive to live in Akwa Ibom State. Oyo State is 31.2% inflation rate, annual inflation rate. Oyo State 31.2%, and of course Lagos State, where we are, is at 31.2% as well. So Lagos State is quite expensive. Food inflation in Lagos State is 27%. River State is 31.4%, and that is the second most expensive state in Nigeria. And of course, Kogi State tops as the most expensive state to live in Nigeria if you use inflation rate as your benchmark. Kogi State inflation rate is 34.2%. All right, so we're going to take a short break at some point, and then we would come back with the second segment. Of course, this segment we're going to be talking about markets essentially, equities market. There's some news about Union Bank, and there's news as well on Mikio. We don't have news on Mikio, and of course, Unity Bank and Providus Bank. What's going on there? Stay tuned. Any part of this, there is a broadcast that you can. There's a way you can still go back and listen to this. Check where you listen to your podcast on Spotify, on YouTube. We're currently broadcasting live on YouTube, by the way. So if you go on YouTube now, you can actually see me right in the studio as I run down key economic issues that happened during the week. Of course, so we now move into the equities market. I mean, for those who follow me a lot, I do like the equities market because I invest a lot in Nigerian stocks and US stocks as well. Equities market is one of the biggest wealth creators out there, regardless of what people say about stock market. There's still a lot of money to be made there, and so you should track the equities market. And last week, end of the week on Friday, the equities market closed at an all-time high of 71,112.99 points. That's the highest the equity market has ever traded in Nigeria. Like historically, that's history. History was made on Friday. Yeah, 71,112.99 all share index. It's incredible that this has happened. I mean, remember over the years we've seen, the stock market. It's taking them about 10 years to get to 65,000, which was what it hit back in 2007-8. Taking over 10 years, but now we're here and we're cruising. It's as if it's not stop. Stock market just seems to be a different market entirely from the economy, hitting 71,000. Of course, market capitalization is 39 trillion. Thinking that sometime by the end of this week, we're going to cross another benchmark, which is the 40 trillion mark in terms of market capitalization. One thing people would typically say is that the stock market just has maybe a few stocks that sort of drive it. Nairametrics will call them the suits. The suits are the stock worth over 1 trillion naira. There are not many of them, but the stocks are major drivers. They include Dangote Cement, MTN, Airtel, Bua Cement as well, Zenith Bank and GT Bank also in there. I think Seplat is also in there as one of the suits. Nestle used to be in there, but no longer in there because of course what's going on with consumer goods stocks. But these are the stocks that sort of make up suit. And of course, there's the likes of Gary Good is just very close to hitting a trillion naira in market capitalization. So when these stocks sneeze, the stock market catches cold. So these are the major drivers. But we're close to 40 trillion. Likely going to hit it by the end of this week. 1,000 points. Impressive as well. Last week we heard. We got a scoop. We heard that Unity Bank and Providus Bank were discussing a potential business combination. At least that's what we were told. Business combination is different from an acquisition, so it doesn't look like your typical acquisition. Maybe it sounds like a bit more like a merger, but they use the term business combination. That's what we were told. That both banks were looking at coming together. They're kind of different, because Unity Bank is a much older bank, and it's a bank made up of several other banks. I think over a dozen banks as well, if you all recall. And then Providus Bank is a newer generation bank, newer generation bank. Probably existed just barely 5 years, and it has made its own mark as well as a newer bank, courted mostly by startups. So this deal appears to be about trying to be a lot bigger. Appears Providus Bank is looking to leverage on Unity Bank's branch, spread, and of course its own market share in quotes. But Unity Bank seems to have a bit of challenge as well. Don't want to go into their books, but I mean you can go to Nairametrics and read that up. A lot of people are wondering why this merger, why these two banks coming together. It doesn't look like it's a good fit, but with the guys running these things, you never know what they're looking for. They have run their numbers, and it appears they feel like there's a good mix here between Unity Bank and Providus Bank. So this is one that we're going to be tracking. It's not official yet, by the way, so it's just scoops. It was in some outlets last week as well. Unity Bank and Providus Bank, they haven't come out to make any statement yet. So might just be one of those things that you hear that never comes to fruition. Recall a few years ago, Unity Bank did also, was also in this sort of discussion when the gist was that they were going to be acquired by, I think it was called Milost Global back then, but that didn't turn out at all. That sort of fell through. But this time around, this is looking like something that might happen. And if you speak to industry watchers, they will tell you yes, that there's something like this going on as well. Talking about banks, one of Nigeria's oldest banks and one of the most respected banks that we've had growing up. This is one of those banks that you sort of look up to. I still remember when they hit the 1 billion, total assets back then, and it was like major news for them. I had that white horse that was just running through and told you they hit the 1 billion mark. Union Bank, Union Bank of Nigeria announced that they were going to be delisting from the stock exchange after 52 years. 52 whole years. They're going to be delisting, no longer going to be a quoted company. Of course, that is because they were acquired towards the end of 2021 by Titan Trust Bank. If you all recall, that news made headlines late 2021 when they got central bank approval to acquire 89% stake in Union Bank. So we did hear the deal was completed last year, and I think they acquired maybe 90 or 93% stake or something like that of Union Bank. So because they've acquired that much stake of Union Bank, they essentially own the bank. So I mean, the bank doesn't belong to the public like that anymore. And so the remaining minority shareholders would have to be paid off, and then the bank will delist and will no longer exist as a publicly quoted bank. Doesn't mean it's still not a bank. It is still a bank. It's just that it is no longer a publicly quoted bank. So it's just a bank that is now held by private individuals. And so you're not going to be seeing results of Union Bank anymore as you used to on the exchange. You probably see it on their website. Doesn't mean anything is happening to your deposit. If you have accounts in Union Bank, nope, nothing happens to your deposit. It's still running as a bank, as a healthy bank, no issues. It's just that it is now owned by different set of investors, and actually been owned by different investors since last year per their release. It's just that they are no longer listed as a quoted company again. So quite interesting that that's happening. I mean, we all know at some point in Nigeria, Union Bank and First Bank were like the strongest banks in the country. In fact, they were going neck and neck for who was number one. But sometime in 2011 or 12, Union Bank ran into trouble with the central bank, and they were acquired at that time by Bob Diamond's entity. Acquired Union Bank, Atlas Mirror, I think that's the name. Yeah, Atlas Mirror acquired Union Bank at the time, and introduced some kind of stability. But Looks like with emerging market crisis that has happened, COVID-19, higher inflationary environment, dearth of investment in emerging markets, everything sort of has affected investment in here, and they basically had to sell, and of course they sold their majority stake to Titan Trust Bank, and this is now what is leading to delisting on the exchange. Talking about listing on the exchange, which is the opposite of delisting, the stock market, and that's the NGX CEO Timiko Popola mentioned last week that the stock market has actually gained a lot from listing companies that have listed. One thing that has been synonymous with the stock market lately is not listing by introduction. You've not seen a lot of IPOs in this market. You've seen mostly listing by introduction. Listing by introduction, of course, is just companies listing on the stock exchange and not going for an IPO. And typically when companies list on the exchange, it's because they want to raise capital, and so you always have IPOs, and it's always a huge frenzy. But these days, that's not what happens. You just see companies list on the exchange, and then they quietly maybe now raise capital on the back of that. And so we've seen a lot of it lately. Just to give you a bit of a rundown, we've seen Boa Foods. Boa Foods listed as well a couple of years ago. Geregu also listed, which is the first power-related company that's listed on the exchange. So they've been listed for about a year now. VFD Group listed this year as well. Incredible story for VFD Group, by the way. So they also listed this year on the exchange, and of course, there's also the first listed investment trust company. That's the Nigerian Infrastructure Debt Fund. That is also listed on the Nigerian exchange. And then just recently, we got a healthcare company list on that exchange, and that's Micure. Micure listed on the exchange during the week. To last week, and they've been like the top gainer since they listed on the exchange. So we've seen a lot of that lately, and that looks like how a lot of companies choose to list on the exchange. They prefer to list by introduction rather than just basically running IPOs. It's still good. At least there are companies out there that are available for us to list in. I'm going to close with something that has been on my mind for a bit, and that has been the performance of what you call penny stocks. Penny stocks are typically those stocks that trade at less than a penny or less than $1 in US terms. So in Nigeria, you might want to associate stocks like, you might want to call them Kobo stocks, Kobo stocks, or stocks that trade maybe below 2 naira or something. Very, very lowly priced stocks. People tend to like them because of, they're cheap. So with 100,000 naira, you could just own 100,000 shares of the stocks. And their prices tend to move, or at least people think that their prices tend to move high. But not always like that. But in any case, we've noticed a huge trend this year of penny stocks actually gaining significantly, and I can't understand why. So I'm just going to give you some of the numbers, the list that I have here. Probably companies that you're not very familiar with. Omatech Ventures, you ever heard of them? They're a computer-based company listed on the exchange as well. Up 335% year to date. The year is not even over yet, but they've gained 335%. Ikeja Hotels, 349%. Those are that. I think they're the owners of Sheraton Hotel. 349.5% year to date gain. FTN Coco, you heard of them before? They've gained 489% this year. I mean, so if you bought those stocks, you probably gained that much. Japor Gold and Ventures, 507% gain this year. Charms, a tech company, one of the very first tech companies listed on the exchange, has gained over 800% year to date this year. Of course, some of these gains were also because of capital restructuring that they've had, but some were just share price going up without any major fundamentals. Food for thought. Would you invest in penny stocks? Alright guys, that's it for this week. Again, tune in next week on the station, 8 to 8:30. Follow the Money, where I break down key economic and macroeconomic issues and markets from Nigeria. If you missed any part of this show, check anywhere you listen to your podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on YouTube. Currently streaming live on YouTube, but you can always check it out on YouTube. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week.